So in my search for speakers, all the speakers, I have pretty much asked to be here, most of them. And if you'd like to be a speaker next year in SkeptiCamp, usually the first week of the year, please let us know in plenty of time, and we'll do what we can to facilitate that so you can become one of our speakers. And I sent an email to CSUMB because we wanted to get involve a little more local of the community. And I sent an email to the science department, and I said, you know, I run Monterey County Skeptics, and you know, we're the good skeptics, the good people. You know, we like science, and because I don't know what they think. You know, they might think we're a climate change denier group or something like that, or Holocaust deniers or something like that. So I sent out an email, and they sent it out to the science department, and we found Don Fischer. And I'm very happy that we did that, because he's just a lovely person. He's come out to a few of our meetups. So when you come to our meetups, you may actually get to meet Don. And he's going to be talking to us today about neuroscience. He's had a very prolific career, and you can read about it on the bio. You can also find him on CSUMB's website, where he's an adjunct professor, and a long career at DLI, and on and on and on. But let me mic him up, and we will get started.
Well, thank you for letting me come here. I've been exploring some ideas over the years, and it's time to put them into words. What I'm talking about is learning. Can learning be as good as sex? That's the title of the place. And but what it really is dealing with a hypothesis that I'm trying to develop, that when we learn anything that's imposed on us by our culture, or you want to learn a second language or something like that. This is a language. If I go to say au revoir, or auf Wiedersehen, or adios, you know I'm saying goodbye. But if I say E equals MC squared, a lot of you might know about that, but another person who just saw that the first time wouldn't know what that is. So they'd have to know what energy was, and joules was, and mass was, and the speed of light was, and an exponent what square means. So you're learning verbal and nonverbal icons that lead to operations, whether you're learning a foreign language or whether you're learning a language such as audio specifications or something like that. And the only thing that masks that, of course, is all the connectors. So that's the hypothesis. And the question becomes, how do we learn that? Maybe we can learn physics like we learned our native language. And what are the components of learning our native language that made it so easy for us, even though it took us about 12 years before we got reasonably close to an adult explanation, or an adult means of being able to express ourselves. These are two different people that I kind of like. Edwin Guthrie was an old-time behaviorist around the Skinner days, and he said you have to watch what people are learning. They may not be learning what you want them to learn. For example, you send somebody home with a homework assignment they can't do, like the speed thing, the train things that collide from San Antonio and Chicago, and you sit there and work all night and try to figure it out. You may learn procrastination or falling asleep, as opposed to learning the math. Now, the other one, and so he says, watch what the person is doing when they stop the learning, because when they come back into that environment, they're going to do it the same way. Which will lead to a couple of points, that success breeds success and failure breeds failure. Patricia Churchland is a neurophilosopher that teaches down at San Diego State, and she talks about the 4 F's. Those are fighting, fleeing, fighting, feeding, and reproduction. I'll let you know what the 4th F is. And she says that we're either in avoidance behavior or foraging behavior. And the problem with learning is getting it into foraging side as opposed to something that you're always threatened about. I like physics because it's physics. Taking physics because I'm working at physics because I'm worried about getting a bad grade. It's negative versus positive reinforcement. Well, we'll talk about the brain, and these are neurons communicating with each other. You can see they flow down the axons from one neuron to another, and the information goes to a terminal, and that terminal is called the synapse. We know about neurons. We've been working on a neuron philosophy for about 100 years, but around 2010, I can't remember the lady scientist, but she bought a slice of Einstein's brain. And you can do that, I guess, if you have enough money. And she, looking at this thing, and we'd always known about neurons, but we'd always seen gray and white matter. And people had thought that the function of gray and white matter was to hold the brain together, and that's why it's called glia, the Greek word for glue. But what they really found out with her experiments and what's going on now is that these glia that people thought had no function have tremendous functions. They regulate impulses in the brain. They regulate the blood flow. They keep the brain clean and keep bacteria out of it. And we'll talk today about they regulate the uptake and release of dopamine, which is your motivating chemicals in your brain, and the opiates, which tells you that you achieve the object of your motivation. They also, instead of communicating electronically, they communicate like cell phones. They communicate across the brain to multiple points throughout the brain, and they do it chemically. So they, all of a sudden, they are the big thing in your brain. And Einstein had the same kind of neurons that you and I have, but he had more astrocytes and more glia than we did. And this is, these are two neurons communicating. Let's say you want something, and you're going to do that which it takes to get there. The vesicles in that top neuron are going to release dopamine. And that dopamine is going to transmit across to the next neuron, communicating whatever message that you want to communicate. Now, in between that, it's being mediated by what they call mu opioids. These are opiate receptors that are, and they are these astrocytes that are regulating that transmission. They regulate the intensity of it. They regulate the feeling that you get when you meet the goal. So it's this interplay of dopamine which motivates, and then the opiates are released to give you that feeling of satisfaction that you've accomplished a goal. And this is your natural reward system. This is what's going on when you look for food and you get the food. You look for water, you get the water. Sex, you're looking for a mate, you get the mate. And there's this motivation to get it, and then there's this feeling that comes over you that says, I got it. And of course in nurturing, that's the same thing too. These are the basic feelings of having to do things to survive, and then having the feeling of satisfaction that you get when you accomplish those particular goals. Well, over time, that morphs, thanks to language and learning and all that kind of stuff. That morphs into what you say, who you are, and what you become. So, can we get learning into that natural motivation cycle? I don't think we can quite do that, but we can get closer than we think. And the issue is to get the learning to be something that somebody wants, rather than something that somebody is afraid of or is motivated by punishment or something like that. Now this is a diagram of human behavior, and it's very interesting, and this is the sex part. Those dopamines and opiates, they start in the gonadal area. It's testosterone and estrogen serve to produce what they call vasopressin, which leads to dopamines, and oxytocin, which are derivatives of opium. And what they do is these things, for example, if I'm looking for a mate, it becomes socio-sexually activated. And I'll see this and have distal motivation. That means I see the person and there's a smile, there's a wave, there's a wink, there's a little bit of talk. And so that motivates me to say, well, this is a very interesting person. Maybe I'll pursue it. So the conversation starts and that leads into something. And all this is a process of reinforcement and then motivation. And you keep doing that until the time comes that you achieve that particular goal. And when you get from approach and you get to consumption, then of course there's this dopamine and opiate release, which in your mind says, and it translates to a bunch of different things, that says, I got what I asked for. Now take a look at how the body and the mind work. They're not separate. There's not a homunculus or inside that's telling you right or wrong or making your decisions for you. Those decisions happen based on your experience, your emotions, and what you've grown to like over time. The first function I'm talking about is homeostasis, and that's the thermostatic function of your brain. It keeps you in balance. It keeps you standing. If you're getting nervous, you're excited, it says, okay, let's sit down. Or if it gets too bad, you'll faint. Something like that. But its job is to keep you alive and comfortable. The sociostasis is what the brain does to keep you in positive interaction with other folks. Around 2006 or so, they discovered mirror neurons. And these neurons are the things that enable us to sense what other people are feeling. That would be an example of sociostasis. And somatic is the likes and dislikes, the good and the bad that you've experienced over life, which causes you to approach situations in different ways. So, the brain wants you comfortable, and for many, learning environments are not comfortable. Here's another thing, babies. Why do they learn so fast? They're born with 100 times the dopamines and opiates that, let's say, a 12-year-old has. And why do they have this? It motivates them to seek shelter, love, food, and they do it by mimicking the caregiver. There's a wonderful book by John Schumann called The Interactional Instinct, which shows babies mimicking the face of the caregiver in order to get what they need, which is your basic drives of food, water, nurturing, and all that kind of stuff. So they are primed for learning. Of course, also you know about language. You're primed to learn any of the 6,000 languages in the world. What happens through disuse, you lose the synapses that allow you to do that. And somehow we have to generate them when we take in a foreign language or do something new. But at any rate, DA makes us seek, and opiates makes us feel satisfied. Now, along with this, we have a stimulus appraisal theory, which John Schumann and Klaus Scherer kind of work with. Let me get back to one. They say that the distinguishing characteristic among learners is, since neurons are pretty much the same, it's the emotional side. It's what you've lived and what you feel when you approach a situation. So he says that's a distinguishing characteristic in differences in learning. And so in learning then we have to take the emotional side. We have to create a positive engagement when we do learning. So they went through all of the theories of appraisal, stimulus appraisal, which is basically saying when you approach a situation, your mind, your emotions, your body makes an evaluation and an expectation and sets an attitude when you approach a new task or a new situation. And what he found out, or what they found out, was about 8 different theories in it. There's 5 things that need to be around in some degree or another when a person learns something new. It needs to be relevant. It needs to be something that the person needs. It needs to look like it's going to help self and social status. It should be novel, interesting. It should be pleasant, at least not off-putting. And the learner has to be able to cope with the task, or the brain, wanting comfort, will take you someplace else. So if the task violates one or more of these elements, it's very likely that the brain will take you someplace else where you're comfortable. If you don't like a PowerPoint presentation, you might want to go to sleep. If you don't like a math problem, you might want to say, I deserve a break today, and go watch television and play video games. That kind of thing. Your brain's always putting you where you are the most comfortable. For learning to occur, then, it's very important that people be able to cope with the task. They need to stretch when they're learning, but they can't be required to stretch so far that the brain will say, you're not comfortable here, get out of here. So we need to ensure the ability to cope, to get things into the foraging mode. The only people I know who will keep doing something that they're no good at for years and years are golfers. I happen to be one. Now, again, we'll go back and we take a look at this, and we look at what is language. Language is any set of verbal and nonverbal signs that symbolize operation and cause us to do things. Conventional symbols, and you'll see that's kind of, it could be German, it could be physics, it could be English literature. There are domains of language that relate to any body of knowledge that you need to know and need to know intimately in order to be good at it. So when we learn a language, how do we learn our native language or anything? The first thing you do is you listen and you see. And we're built to imitate. Albert Bandura says 85% of what we learn is imitation. Then the second thing is you take those sounds, and if you're a kid who comes from an enriched background, you've got a lot of words in your head. So maybe learning to read is not so hard because you can relate the symbol to a sound. Well, we do that, and then we go from reading, we go into writing. But these are stages in learning any type of language or any kind of vocabulary. It's silent at first, you're listening, then you start to produce. If I said something like nucleus accumbens, which is a brain term, you wouldn't know what that is, but if I showed you a picture of it, pretty soon you might be trying to use that word. Then you keep into that subject and speech will begin to emerge, fluency will increase, and finally you'll be able to do something with the language. And that happens with language, it happens with science, it happens with math. You have to do it, you have to use it, you have to express yourself in it before you can get good at it. And of course today we do have technologies that can bring these enriched environments to us at almost no cost. Along with that, what we've also kind of deduced from this, I think our work that we're trying to do in this case is we're trying to take stimulus and appraisal, learn about it, find out how it works with teaching, and then turn those considerations into some kind of methodology so that we can increase the probability of learning every time we go at it. It may not be the same way for everybody, but at least we do these things. And these are 5 elements that we think are important. How you present it, and so make the person interested in it, and see how it's going to help them, and how wonderfully new this is. But then the next thing you have to do, and this has been kind of demeaned in educational philosophy, that people have to practice it. You have to do it a few times. People talk the language of drill and kill. It's drill and skill. And one of these astrocytes is called, generates myelin. And what these little glia things do is when you do something, and then you do it again, it wraps the axon that's transmitting the information. The more you practice it, the more you do it, and it's very important to do it correctly the first time, this thing insulates that particular neuron, and if it doesn't, the insulation stops leakage, and leakage are mistakes. So we practice, and we practice the right way. Then we get somebody to produce with what they've practiced, And now, in this day and age, we have things called learning management systems. Collaborate, iMoodle, iLearn. And what you can do is you can take a student's work and post it up for all to see. Teachers can see it, the student can see it, the group of students can see it. So you can have a kind of a soft accountability because nobody's going to want to be really the one that isn't up there. So you're getting into that self and social status. And finally, we think that when you get these individuals to this point, it's good to get them in groups and have them participate and solve problems. So if you go through all those 5 sequences, you can probably pretty well ensure that somebody's going to learn what they need to have learned.